Okay, this is a video update for you about this instrument, kind of what we're finding, what our strengths and weaknesses are, and what a game plan will be moving forward. So I took a picture of the brand and the serial number, and I will look up the exact manufacture date in the Piano Atlas, which is a book that has all sorts of early American piano builders in it. I'm guessing from the legs and from the closed-faced steel plate and cross stringing of the model that we're looking at 1902, 1900 something, possibly even 1899, 1898, although that's a little early for the steel plate to go over the pin block. So this piano is a grandma piano. And when you have a piano that has lived to be, 115 years old or more, the rules change a little bit. On just the plain bottom line, you would spend more restoring this piano than you would on a brand new grand piano. So less is more. We want to have an approach that allows the instrument to be enjoyable without opening a can of worms, because the parts are 100 plus years old, and lots changed in that amount of time. I was able to tune it to A440, which is international standard pitch for a modern instrument. When this piano was built, pitch was pretty localized. A tuning fork is metal, and it changes pitch based on the temperature of the metal. It also changes pitch based on the barometric pressure of the air, so the altitude of where you're tuning can affect kind of what your starting point is. So when this piano was invented, I'm guessing that the tension expected to be on the instrument was more like A435. And I've moved it up to A440 today because it's not going to stay at that. It's going to settle down a bit, and I'm hoping it settles kind of right to its comfort level, and then we float it from there. So first we're going to talk about the major acoustic components of your instrument, and then we're going to talk about the touch response mechanism. So first things first, the pin block. The tuning pins, essentially you only see the very end of them. There's another 2 inches of them driven into a rock maple pin block. And one of the beautiful things about pianos of this era is how incredible the quality of wood stock is. This tree was 200 years old at least when they cut it down to make this piano 115 years ago. And there is no quality wood like that available for instruments any longer. So a beautiful piece or several pieces of maple were made into the pin block of this piano, and that is why it is still able to be tuned, because the quality of the wood stock in manufacturing. It is not one piece of maple. If you had this beautiful piece of wood and then started drilling holes in it and then started jamming tuning pins in, the wood would just crack along the grain, and then you'd have no tension on the pins. So this is several laminations, probably a quarter to a half inch thick, of rock maple going in different directions, because the wood has a better end grip for the tuning pin than it does through grip. So even if one of these laminations fails or starts to get fatigue, the others are still solid enough to hold tension. And it is remarkable that a piano of this age is holding tension at all. There were not any tuning pins that were like an elastic band, but all of them were able to settle at some form or another near tension. Now, not perfectly. A lot of them have a wiggle or a recoil that makes them hard to settle, but we would kind of address those worst first as we get to know the instrument a little better. So the pin block's pretty remarkable. The other 2 major acoustic components that we're going to talk about are the bridge and the soundboard. So when you hear the piano, you don't hear the wire. The wire does not move enough air. So even if I could hold the wire in between my fingers under the right amount of tension and strike it, we wouldn't hear anything. It doesn't move enough air. So the wire is holding the tension. Tension is transferred by down bearing through the bridge to the soundboard. And the soundboard is the speaker. The soundboard is what's moving all the air. Now, every piano, the soundboard is about a quarter of an inch thick at its thickest in the middle, and tapers to be narrower around the edges. And the soundboard also has a crown to it. So on a grand piano, it would be like an arched ceiling. On an upright, it's like a belly pushing out. It's designed to be at a specific curvature under the appropriate down-bearing tension of those strings. So this piano hasn't been tuned in a long time. The down-bearing tension of the wires is insufficient, and the crown of the soundboard sits in an exaggerated posture. And then as I'm going through and tuning, I'm pushing down here, and it's moving that part of the soundboard down. Pushing down here, it's moving down that. It takes about 3 weeks for the soundboard to settle back to its designed curvature. There's no way to rush that. It's just a dynamic process. As you affect one thing, it changes the next. And again, pretty remarkable for its age. There is at least one crack in the soundboard that I was able to take a picture of. I'll send that separately. And a crack in the soundboard is not the end of the world, but it can be one of the signposts pointing to the end of the world. Essentially, so we're talking about the soundboard, is the membrane that's moving the air. If you have a crack in the soundboard, well, when the membrane moves the air, just that much air does not get moved. So not a problem there. What starts to happen, however, as you play the instrument, is that the portions of the soundboard can move at different rates. And then, perpendicular to the grain of the soundboard on the back of the instrument, there are these ribs. And the ribs are actually what's holding that soundboard in its curvature. Because the soundboard, like I said, it's a 1/4 of an inch thick. It's not thick enough to withstand all that down-bearing tension. So the ribs keep the crown in the soundboard against the down-bearing force of the wire. And when you've got a crack in the soundboard, if it starts to move at different rates on either side of the crack, it will pull the ribs off of one side or both sides of the soundboard, and you get a growling noise, kind of a wax papery sound, which I did not hear today. And with an old piano, if I don't hear a problem, there's no problem. This is not like a piano that's 2 years out of the factory that we are, surrounding it to try to find out the issues. This is an old piano, so less is more, and if grandma has lived to be 100 smoking cigars every day, let her. There are things that we can do to help keep the instrument a little more pampered, which we'll get to. So rib separation and the growling soundboard, that can be very intermittent. That could be something that's, one note on one day, and then a whole octave the next day, and then it rains, and then it's gone. I mean, it can be very humidity related and very temperamental. Like I said, I didn't hear it today, so it's not something we want to address. Those are your major acoustic components. As far as the touch response of the piano, this is one of the areas where old pianos get paralyzed. So one of the main reasons why Steinway holds its antique value is because you can still get parts. You can get parts for pretty much any Steinway, or they will have at least the exact specs to manufacture them for you. With this old piano, this brand is no longer in business, so if something goes wrong, your options are either to scrap pieces from the very highest note or the very lowest note to make the mid-range work, or you try to find some geometry that's, one size fits all, which very seldom fits any. So the thing with old pianos is they tend to get paralyzed by their actions. And with that in mind, we try to keep our adjustments and repairs to a respectful minimum, because you can open a can of worms. You can break two things trying to fix one just with old brittle wood. That being said, there's 10,000 plus moving parts. Some of those moving parts are closer to the end of a chain of events, and so you can get away with making adjustments that don't have these knock-on effects on the neighboring parts. And so, speaking of touch response for your piano is bobbling like crazy. So, get-a-ga-dum, get-a-ga-dum. The mechanism of the piano is essentially a miniature catapult. You're shooting the hammer at the string and catching and reloading it. You have to be out of the way, or the string has no room to ring. The dynamics of the piano, the combinations of soft and loud touch response, are directly related to how far away from the string are you when you start, and how close to the string are you when you shoot the catapult, which is called let-off. Your piano has early let-off, so it is escaping. We stop having influence too early, and that means that for the tuner, I can't really knock it into tune. I'm supposed to be able to deliver a maximum force that's beyond the change that 100 soft strikes would bring. So I can't really knock it into tune, which wouldn't be advisable with old parts anyway, but it's hard to feel that things are settled. For the musician, when you have such a great distance to cross to the wire, and you're trying to play softly, well, it can't cross that great distance with that amount of force. So dynamically, the instrument is kind of medium. And we may or may not be able to get away with adjusting the let-off on the piano so that it plays more dynamically. But there's 88 individual buttons that would have to be moved, and the chances of all of them cooperating with a piano of this age are pretty minimal. So it's not necessarily something we want to dive into. And it's not one of those repairs that are at the end of a chain of events. There would be all these other side effects that in some cases can be unanticipated. So I wouldn't advise, just based on the age of the piano, that we try to change the let-off. But the bobbling, while it's related to the let-off, can actually be addressed with a couple other things. Back checks, so arresting the hammer on its motion back, possibly not the chief culprit. That's a way of addressing the symptom, not the problem. And then, ironically, damper return spring tension can force parts into retrograde. If the springs on the damper are too strong, they tend to push the other action components backwards once your finger's coming off. Or once the tension on your fingers is releasing. That's, again, one of the contributing factors. Usually with the piano, you hear a buzz, but it's a click and a rattle and a rub. So there's usually contributing factors, and we'd be trying to get rid of the one that does the most for us to get rid of the symptom. So to get rid of that bobble, the most likely thing we would do is increase aftertouch, and by imparting more motion through the key, more motion would get to the action and those components would clear. Because essentially what's happening is the hammer is hitting the string and then rebounding off another component, the head of the jack. And so you're hearing it's going to bouncing back and forth between these parts. So it may be as simple as removing some shims from underneath the front of the keys to get rid of that bobbling symptom. And that would be nice, and it wouldn't have all these other knock-on effects on the rest of the components, because it really is at the end of the chain of events. So that might be really nice to do. And as far as what is the game plan moving forward, we can put one more tuning on this if we want to make it, it is much better than when we started, but it's still, especially going up into the high end, it's still got some erratic stuff going on. It's the best we can do for today because the soundboard needs to settle. And really the objective in today's tuning was just not to break any wires, which it did remarkable. No broken wires are on it now, no broken wires before we started. I was very forgiving with the lowest bass notes because every single one of them was giving me the sensation they were about to break, and we did not want to open that can of worms. And then going into the high end, basically this piano is cross-strung, so the bass wires start over here and go down. The mid-range wires start here and go down. So those two high-tension, long wires reinforce each other on the crown of the soundboard. Then you get into the high end, and now the wires are really short and getting shorter. There's not all that downbearing, and they're not reinforced by anything. So as far as the change on the soundboard, it tends to go up to the D5 octave here and going up where wire is short and not reinforced by any other downbearing on the crown of the board. So this is really where we're hearing it most. What your piano needs is humidity during the winter. And some people run humidifiers just for the comfort of their skin during the dry months. We're also having these erratic seasonal swings where it was like 60 degrees a week ago and it's going to be 20 tomorrow. Who knows if it'll stay cold or not. But at least for the last 3 years, December has been this humidity roller coaster, and then we get to January and February, and it's turned negative 20 degrees for weeks on end. That's really when it's going to be most aggressive for your piano because the air will dry out. So what I would recommend is that we use the old wives' trick for keeping moisture in the piano. And the old wives' trick would have been that here, down in the bottom board of the piano, kind of flying blind with the camera there, down here, where there's all this flat real estate, we put some mason jars. Mason jars with water in them, and that water will evaporate into the instrument. And so the piece of wood that's in front of your knees when you're playing is called the front door, and that will be closed back up again with the mason jars in it, and so the moisture will evaporate to the instrument most and first. You probably would have to fill the mason jars every 10 days. You could keep an eye on them, and the piano will thank you for it. The tuning will be more stable, and these components will hopefully maintain the status that they're at right now. So a piano is obviously very heavy. It takes 3 months for a piano to twist to the floor after a move. So Carnegie Hall has a stage that moves. The orchestra pit is not for the orchestra. You can pick up your cello. The orchestra pit is for the 9-foot Steinway holding 20 tons of pressure. Don't roll the piano. It's going to twist it. It's going to take a while for that twist to really settle to any changes. Move the whole room. And in less professional settings, you see grand pianos that have metal tripods underneath them so that when they are rolled around, the twisting is minimized by that reinforcing structure. So the piano takes 3 months to find the floor. This piano's been here for a couple months, so it's most of the way there. And then the piano takes a full year after those 3 months of experiencing both sides of the seasonal humidity swing in order to tell you what it thinks of the new room. And a lot of times with these old pianos, they have lived for the last 70 or 80 years in one spot, and that's what they're used to. And so this is a time, this time of change, it's important to try to pamper the instrument. So I would definitely do the mason jars inside the front door, and I'll make a separate video to show you. It's super simple how to do that, and try to, as many as you can fit in there without them getting spilled. Is how many you want to use. It'll buy you more time. It'll get the piano more moisture. Ironically, the wood that is comprised the bottom of your instrument is wormy walnut, which is an extinct breed of walnut. And again, it just speaks to the availability of extraordinary wood stock. That's in a spot that no one's ever going to see. You know, it's not a cabinet piece, and yet it's a really desirable piece of lumber these days. All right, I'm going to put your piano back together. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns, and I'll talk to you soon.